more recently, if you look at the literature on strength training, you realize that you can break up the ecologies of the body, of the person, into sub-ecologies, each of which is in fact trainable.
It's funny that you went here, because as we were discussing this was the segue into this discussion, right?
Yeah, you know what? So maybe take over, because I think one of the things that we talk about at the strength course, and you know, people, their eyes light up there, is that there's enough literature to support the training of very specific tissue ecologies in the body, as opposed to just considering it from a muscular perspective. So maybe I'll leave it there and let you take off.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, so I'm not really sure how to pull it all in. So, you know, anybody can jump in as we go. But I think, like if you read, I was just doing some research on plyometric training. So like reactive strength. So there's some qualities that are necessary for reactive strength. What are those qualities that are necessary for reactive strength? Well, we need muscular strength, obviously, some relative muscular strength. So what is reactive strength? Reactive strength is just your ability to explode off the ground with stiffness, right? So they measure it. This is not important for this discussion, but it leads into this discussion. They measure it by like how high you can jump in like a stiff ankle hop, divided by the time spent on the ground. And that gives you like a measure of reactive explosiveness. Make sense? So if you actually look at some of the literature that we have on reactive strength, generally what they'll say is that reactive strength requires some strength of your lower limb, obviously. It requires some stiffness of your tendons, your Achilles tendon specifically. It requires some stiffness of your foot. It requires some range of motion in particular ways of your ankle. And the assumption is that, well, I can do general exercises that focus on those areas, i.e. calf raises. I'm making this really simple. And by doing calf raises at various loads or weights, I will acquire that muscular strength and that Achilles tendon stiffness and that ankle range of motion that then will allow me to get reactive strength. But that doesn't make any sense, right? So I think what I'm trying to get at here is that if you look at the prerequisites of reactive strength, ankle range of motion, that is a trainable quality that comes with a certain ecology that is associated with ankle range of motion. That would be accessibility to more capsular input, or capsular space, as we would call it. Achilles tendon stiffness, well, that's what we would call white tissue. That's tissue that has certain behaviors, and those behaviors are different than muscular tissues. And because those behaviors are different than muscular tissues, connective tissues should display certain elements or have certain behaviors within dynamic movement that should be trainable. That's a different ecology, right? And then you would have what we would call red tissue, which just relates to muscle, that also has specific behaviors. And those specific behaviors are dependent upon how much load is being moved or how quickly the movement happens. And those are trainable qualities. So in the internal model, we've said, okay, well, there are different ecologies that make up this grand thing that we call strength. And strength is different for different things, and it has different emergences in different environments. So we can take all of the anatomy, what we would call the biological elements, and we can divide them up and say, well, they all have these interrelationships and they all create feedbacks to one another, but they're all different. They all are made up potentially of different tissues, and therefore they have different behaviors and they have different qualities. And each one of those behaviors and each one of those qualities is trainable in the model. And so we can break those things up and say, okay, well, you know, we can focus specifically on connective tissue as a trainable element. We can focus on muscle tissue as a trainable element. We can focus on the joint, which most people wouldn't think is trainable, as a trainable element. And then if we can do that, we can say, well, each one of those as well is going to have a certain capacity. And there's a certain capacity right now at a certain point in time. And we can then make that capacity as dynamic based on how we train and how we move in particular sports. And so getting back to an assessment can give us indications of what that capacity is. And so we can start to push individual capacities in specific tissues, therefore training specific ecological niches within this grand ecology that we call the human system. And the goal would be that if I increase specific ecology of connective tissue, that would create feedbacks and carryover and interrelationships into joint specific ecologies or muscle specific ecologies. And the more I can take and divide each one of those things and understand the capacity of each one of those things specific to demands, I can then understand at what point those specific ecologies are, and I can understand how to push the adaptation of each one of those to create, as John would say, cumulative multifaceted effects, so that I can then gain what I wanted to, or acquire what I wanted to acquire. So getting back to my original example, when you look at this concept of reactive strength, coming from just these general qualities of, well, doing lower leg exercises is going to give you all of those. Well, we can now say, well, reactive strength is an output. It's a capacity of these different ecologies. And if I want to improve my ability to have reactive strength, I must understand where each one of these ecologies is right now, so that I know where to push, whether that be creating more connective tissue architecture and stiffness, which we have an internal model, whether that be creating more accessibility to muscle tissue so that it can pull on that connective tissue with more force and create more explosive outputs. Or is it just that I don't have enough ankle capsular space to actually create that explosiveness off the ground? So I can understand which ecology can be pushed to try to create this accumulation that will eventually lead into what we would call reactive strength.